or so, and then at around 11 Eastern, lawmakers will turn to a bill that aims to reduce regulations for small businesses that want to go public. Just before 2 this afternoon, they'll lay that aside in order to consider a pair of judicial nominations. Votes on those scheduled for later this afternoon. And now live to the U.S. Senate floor here on C-SPAN 2.
The Senate will come to order. Today's opening prayer will be offered by the Reverend Dr. Winford L. Hendricks, Senior Pastor of the Ardmore Baptist Church, Winston-Salem, North Carolina.
May we pray together. Awesome Creator, Sovereign Lord of our nation, you must have been excited when you first dreamed of creating out of nothing this beautiful, complex world with all its natural resources and beauty. Birds of the air, fish of the sea, animals of the earth, and humans to care for all of this and to love you infinitely and to live out your dream for your world. Loving, visionary God, infuse in these women and men known as the United States Senate, your dream for our great nation, here and now in the 21st century, and give to them not only a vision of how things can be, but also give to them the nitty-gritty know-how to make your dream a reality for every person in this great land. And dare we say it, may they and all of us make you excited yet again as we partner with you to actualize your dream for our nation. And we pray in your awesome, loving, creative name. Amen.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., March 15, 2012. To the Senate. Under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Tom Udall, a senator from the state of New Mexico, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Daniel K. Inouye, President pro tempore.
Mr. President.
Majority leaders recognized.
We appreciate Senator Burr allowing this and arranging for this good man to come and offer the prayer this morning. We appreciate that very much. Following leader remarks, Mr. President, the Senate will be in morning business until 11 this morning. The majority will control the first 30 minutes. The Republicans will control the second 30 minutes. Following that morning business, we will begin consideration of the IPO bill, H.R. 3606. Initial public offering is for which those letters stand. At 2, there will be a roll call vote on Groh, and then followed by one on Fitzgerald, the trial judges in our federal court system. Additional votes are possible today. I'm told, Mr. President, that S. 2191 is due for a second reading.
The clerk will read the title of the bill for the second time.
S. 2191, a bill to amend the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 to prohibit the Attorney General from administering or enforcing certain accessibility regulations relating to pools at public accommodations or provided by public entities.
Mr. President, I would object to any further proceedings regarding this bill.
Objection having been heard, the bill will be placed on the calendar.
Mr. President, day after tomorrow, Saturday, Senator Barbara Mikulski becomes the longest-serving woman in the history of the United States Congress. We'll mark that occasion on Wednesday when her family and friends will be present here in the Capitol. I'm prepared detailed remarks for that occasion, but I thought it was important that we note very briefly here today this milestone in the history of our country. Last January, Barbara Mikulski surpassed Margaret Chase Smith from Maine as the longest-serving woman in the Senate. On Saturday, March 17th, she'll surpass Congresswoman Edith Norris Rogers from Massachusetts as the longest-serving woman in Congress. Mr. President, this week the Senate has demonstrated that when Democrats and Republicans cooperate, we're capable of achieving significant things for this country. We passed a transportation bill that will create or save almost 3 million jobs, and these are American jobs, and rebuild our nation's crumbling infrastructure. Yesterday, we charted a course to confirm 14 new judges in the short term and a path for getting more done following that. And this is important because our courts, federal courts, are overworked and understaffed. And we agreed that Congress should continue its work to improve the economy. To that end, the Senate will move today to a piece of legislation that will improve innovators' access to capital and give startups the flexibility they need to hire and to grow. This bill already passed the House by an overwhelming margin. President Obama supports this measure, and both Democrats and Republicans are eager to get to work and pass it next week. In addition to the small business capital legislation, Democrats will also advance a proposal to help American businesses sell more of their products overseas. Reauthorization of the Export-Import Bank, or EXIM Bank as it's called, will help small business export globally. But, Mr. President, it will also help large businesses, not just big businesses. Not just small businesses, also big businesses. Caterpillar, Boeing, these companies really need this to continue the job creation they've been involved in now for the last several years. As an example, last year EXIM Bank financed almost 300,000 private sector jobs at more than 3,600 different American companies in more than 2,000 communities throughout America. Foreign governments often provide financing for companies that compete with American businesses. We need to be able to do this to be more competitive. The EXIM Bank levels the playing field by being available to help American exporters when private lending is not available. But unless we reauthorize this, it will hit its lending limit this month, eliminating this for American exporters. The Export-Import Bank has always had strong bipartisan support, and Democrats' legislation reauthorizing this measure has the firm backing of the Chamber of Commerce and organized labor. This is a strong combination that equals one thing, and that's jobs. Advancing these two items, this EXIM Bank and the Small Business Capital Bill, will continue the important bipartisan work we've done this week to get our economy back on track. I'm pleased that Democrats and Republicans in the Senate have been able to find common ground this week. President Franklin Roosevelt said this, quote, "Competition has been shown to be useful up to a certain point and no further. But cooperation, which is the thing we must strive for today, begins where competition leaves off." I think we've shown this week that achievement comes when its members all strive, as President Roosevelt said, not to compete, but to cooperate. Mr. President, would the Chair announce the business of the day?
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, there will now be a period of morning business until 11 a.m., with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each, with the time equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees, with the majority controlling the first half hour and the Republicans controlling the second half hour. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
recognized.
Thank you. I ask that the quorum call be lifted.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Consumer protection has been a priority for me throughout my career, as I know it has been for the presiding officer. Both he and I served together as attorneys general, and now as a senator, he and I have worked to give consumers a voice against companies that harm them through deceptive and dangerous or abusive practices. This month, Mr. President, we recognize consumers in two ways. National Consumer Protection Week, recognized the week of March 4 through 10, is led by government and nonprofit groups, and its focus is to encourage consumers to take full advantage of their consumer rights and make better informed decisions for themselves in the marketplace. And this month we also recognize many of the same consumer issues affecting Americans every day in their lives, the impact on consumers in every corner of the world. And so today we celebrate World Consumer Rights Day. Every day ought to be Consumer Rights Day because, as President Kennedy once said, we are all consumers, and we are consumers every day of every year. Organizations here in America, such as Consumers Union and other consumer groups around the world, celebrate World Consumer Rights Day as members of Consumers International, the nonprofit organization representing 220 consumer groups in 115 countries. Today also marks the 50th anniversary of a very special day in American history for American consumers. On March 15, 1962, President Kennedy sent a message to Congress calling for a national commitment to protecting consumer interests. 50 years ago today, President Kennedy spoke about the consumer right to safety, to be informed, to choose, and to be heard. These rights are the foundation of what we now know as the Consumer Bill of Rights. The Consumer Bill of Rights has grown to include 8 specific guarantees: the right to satisfaction of basic needs, the right to safety, the right to be informed, the right to choose, the right to be heard, the right to redress, the right to consumer education, and the right to a healthy environment. Today, I'd like to propose another right, a 9th right, the right to privacy. There is a growing need to defend individual rights to privacy in a multitude of areas. This country was founded. Its basic bedrock is on a desire for personal privacy, on the right to be left alone. It's the reason that people came to this country, avoiding unwanted and unwarranted intrusion on their personal space, on their rights and liberties. They came here out of a desire for religious freedom, economic liberty, and the security of their person and property against intrusion. It is a uniquely bedrock American right, the right to privacy. Concerns about governmental invasion of personal privacy go back literally to the founding of our republic in the protections guaranteed under the 3rd Amendment when the British lodged troops without permission in our homes, the 4th Amendment when they searched our homes and seized goods and property from them. I've heard numerous complaints from Connecticut residents who are concerned about their privacy. They're concerned about federal and state intrusion into women's health care decisions. They're concerned about government efforts to combat terrorism through tracking of individuals via GPS or cell phone tower location. Those potential invasions of privacy are by the government, by official forces. But people today are also understandably and rightly concerned about corporate intrusion into their privacy. They're concerned about companies crawling the web to collect consumers' personal information and selling it to marketeers. They're concerned about mobile device apps that can access and acquire the device owner's photos and address book without his or her knowledge or consent. They're concerned about credit scores that are created from the use of medications, and those scores are used to set personal health insurance premiums. And they're concerned about companies that are compiling dossiers on the use of social media sites and blogs and selling those reports to prospective employers. They're concerned because they're powerless to prevent the distribution of their contact information to marketers who then deluge them with advertisements in the mail and via email, and they're concerned about companies who don't secure their personal data and the damages that result from improper breaches and disclosures with the risk of identity theft and worse. The Constitution was written to protect Americans from government intrusions into their privacy. And I understand the difference between government intrusions and private sector invasions. But if the government were treating its citizens the ways that some companies are treating their customers, people would be outraged. They'd be up in arms. They'd be dumping tea into the Boston Harbor. The Supreme Court has just ruled that it's not okay for the government to track people via GPS in their car without a warrant. So why would it be okay for a company like OnStar to track drivers who canceled their subscription and sell that information on their movements to marketeers? Americans, many of us and others, were questioning the Patriot Act and its provisions that allow government to access records of what books citizens borrowed from the library and what web pages they visited while they were there. And yet companies are tracking consumers' every movement online through dozens, even hundreds of cookies that are secretly installed on consumers' computers whenever they visit a website. We'd be horrified if the government, as a routine matter, monitored pictures that people take and who they interacted with. And yet, according to news reports, mobile devices and apps are doing exactly that. I believe that it's time that we protect America from intrusions into their personal privacy by companies or educational institutions or others who may not be part of the government. Big brother or big sister no longer need wear a police uniform or a badge or a military uniform. It may well be under the guise of a corporate seal or insignia, and I believe that it is time that we protect against those intrusions as well as others. In fact, I think it is a bipartisan concern. One of the few areas where there is agreement in Congress is the need for better protection of consumers on online privacy. And we may differ on the substance, we may disagree as to what the contours and the specifics should be, but I am concerned about this issue and I'm encouraged by the bipartisan support for attention to it. I was heartened by the President's recent call for a Consumer Privacy Bill of Rights, a great beginning, a very positive step forward, and I believe that our approach to privacy must be comprehensive and robust. As a threshold matter, companies that collect or share information about consumers should be required to get consumers' affirmative opt-in consent for collecting or sharing that data, not an opt-out, an opt-in, specific, informed consent. And that should apply online as well as offline. We've seen a lot of attention paid to Internet tracking and behavioral advertising. I think we ought to protect consumers from privacy invasions that come from the mail or over the phone as well. They particularly affect our seniors. If a company wants to collect, aggregate, share, sell, share by selling or any other means, it should get consumers' permission. Otherwise, it shouldn't be permitted. And we also need to pay attention to the collection of information from consumers' use of mobile devices. As we've seen recently, some mobile apps or operating systems are capable of tracking not just consumers' web browsing, but also their text messages, what they photograph, whom they contact. Mobile devices need a system-wide do not track option to allow consumers to control the distribution of their information. Finally, consumers' right to privacy also must encompass the right to prevent unauthorized distribution of that information. And to that end, we need to establish requirements for companies that possess consumers' personal information to ensure they have security features in place to prevent data breaches. Those protections must be accompanied by remedies, by fines and penalties that make those rights and protections real so that consumers as well have a private right of action. Congress is working on these issues. There have been numerous hearings and legislation proposed, and having the President add his voice to the call for privacy will only help. And as with food safety, product safety, Wall Street reform, companies themselves are demonstrating the need for legislation, and some of them are joining in this effort very constructively. So, Mr. President, as we mark the 50th anniversary of President Kennedy's call to action, let us heed the importance of his message to Congress. And he said, I'm quoting, "As all of us are consumers, these actions and proposals in the interests of consumers are in the interests of us all." We should be proud in this body of having continued the fight for consumer protection. It should be full-throated and full-hearted. Americans went west to the President's, Mr. President, to your state and to others, seeking the open spaces, the opportunities, economic, but also personal, the privacy of being alone. And that American right, that American spirit is very much with us today. It is 50 years after President Kennedy first articulated it, but I believe it is as real and necessary today as ever. Thank you, Mr. President. And I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President,
Republican leader is recognized.
I ask that further proceedings on the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
I'd like to start out this morning by saying that I'm glad we're turning to the bipartisan jobs bill that passed the House last week by such a lopsided margin. Here's a chance not only to help entrepreneurs build their businesses and create jobs, but to show that we can work together around here to get things done on a bipartisan basis. Unfortunately, some of our friends on the other side don't seem to like that idea very much. Apparently, they'd rather spend the time manufacturing fights and 30-second television ads than helping to create jobs. First, they tried to even keep us from bringing this jobs bill up for debate in the Senate. Now we read they're trying to figure out ways to make this overwhelmingly bipartisan bill controversial. They want to pick a fight rather than get this bill to the President's desk. And then they're going to use the same strategy on a number of other bills. Their plan isn't to work together to make it easier to create jobs, but to look for ways to make it easier to keep their own, then use it for campaign ads in the run-up to the November elections. I mean, if you're looking for the reason this Congress has a 9% approval rating, this is it. A day after we read a headline in the Congressional Quarterly about Democrats moving to slow a jobs bill that got 390 votes, we see a story today about how the number 3 Democrat in the Senate is scheming to spend the rest of the year hitting the other side. It goes on to list all the ways he plans to do it, and then it says this, quote, "None of these campaign-style attacks allow for the policy nuances or reasoning behind the GOP opposition, and some of the bills stand no chance of becoming law. But that's really not the point," end quote. So at a moment of economic crisis, the number 3 Democrat in the Senate, the Democrat in charge of strategy over there, is sitting up at night trying to figure out a way to create an issue where there isn't one, not to solve our nation's problems, but to help Democrats get reelected. So I'd like to enter into the record the Politico story I just referred to entitled, "Schumer Schemes to Hit GOP."
Without objection.
It lays out the Democratic strategy. The American people need to know what's going on in the Democratic-controlled Senate. And frankly, so should posterity. 50 years from now, I really would like an American doing a research project to look back at what's outlined in this Politico article today so they can understand what this Democratic-controlled Senate is like, so they can understand what their priorities are. What did this country's leaders do to make America stronger for the next generation? Well, read the Politico piece. It provides a unique insight for future generations of Americans to understand what this Senate has done for the country. They can decide for themselves what they think of it and what its legacy should be. Mr. President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President.
Senator from Virginia is recognized.
Mr. President, I ask that the proceedings of the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I rise today to speak some of the issues that were just addressed by the Republican leader, and that's the legislation that we will hopefully turn to next about creating jobs. You know, there's a lot of occasions when legislation comes to the floor of this Senate that I, like many members, have a view on, and we kind of weigh in on our positions. But this legislation that comes forward is something that I have more than just a kind of an intellectual or political or philosophical viewpoint on. This legislation is actually involves the business that I was in for nearly 20 years. I was proud of the fact that starting in the early 80s up until the time that I was elected as governor of Virginia, I was involved originally as an angel investor and then as a venture capitalist in helping start companies across this country. Proud to have been involved as a venture capitalist in funding almost 70 companies, those companies that grew to now employ tens of thousands of Americans. Although as presiding officer and some of the folks realize, a lot of those companies I involved with were involved in telecommunications. I was the co-founder of Nextel, although even though I can't seem to be able to turn my cell phone off at the appropriate times. But I think that background gave me some sense of what it means to find a management team, to identify find the capital, and get a company started to allow it to grow, create jobs, create economic prosperity. This issue around capital formation, encouraging startups, encouraging entrepreneurs, is an issue that we ought to be able to come together on. I see my good friend, the senator from Kansas, who I know is going to speak in a few moments after I'm finished. And he and I have worked together on legislation called Startup America that has been endorsed by tech councils across the country, been endorsed by and builds upon the work of the Kauffman Foundation, been endorsed and builds upon the work on the President's Council on Jobs and Economic Competitiveness. This ought to be an area where we can find common ground. Some of the ideas that we're going to be discussing in this legislation are not only ideas that Senator Moran and I have worked on, but I know Senator Coons and Senator Rubio, I know Senator Toomey and Senator Schumer, I know Senator Tester, Senator Merkley, Senator Brown. The list, actually, in terms of sponsors or co-sponsors of a number of these bills, number not in the single digits, but literally in the dozens, probably in excess of 20. And for the most part, almost every one of these pieces of legislation are bipartisan. Why do we need to do this? Because if we look over the last 20 years at where the jobs have been created in America, we find that for the most part, unfortunately, the job growth from companies that are in the Fortune 1000 really have been flat, if not slightly negative. So while we applaud and support America's largest businesses, because of increased productivity, because of globalization, those are not the companies really adding jobs. And while every member of the United States Senate, when they stands up and applauds small business, and I know my colleagues on the floor support small business, traditional small businesses, the barbershop, the retailer, the hardware store, there really hasn't been much job growth amongst those companies as well. So where have the jobs come from? The jobs have come from startup businesses, the kind of businesses where an entrepreneur tries to scare up a little bit of capital and takes an idea to market. Nearly 80%, I think, according to the Kauffman Foundation, of all the new jobs created in America in the last 20 years have come from these firms. Now, we oftentimes think of these firms as technology firms. Many of them are, the Facebooks and Googles. But there are also the companies that span the reach of all kinds of different areas, the Lululemons in terms of clothing store, or the Under Armour company that's up in Maryland. These are the kinds of companies that we need to do more to support in their growth, particularly right now when our economy is still struggling. So what are we trying to do in this legislation? Well, to my mind, there's 3 or 4 areas that these bills need to address. First of all, we need to make it easier for these startup companies to raise capital. Over the last decade, a lot of the traditional sources of capital raising have actually diminished, particularly since the financial crisis. The number of venture capital firms that exist that fund companies have actually decreased. The ability for a company to go public, which perhaps we got a little too excessive in the late 90s when we saw dot-com companies rush to go public, and then that dot-com bubble burst and those companies failed, but that access to the public markets has been seriously constrained, partially because of added regulations, partially because of added reporting requirements, and partially because there's been, I think, a recognition that going public may not have been the right route for all of these companies. The result has been that many of these companies...
Senator's time has expired.
I'd ask for an additional 5 minutes.
Without objection.
The result is that many of these startup companies end up having to sell to a larger company, and many of the ideas and many of the job creation opportunities are then constrained. So we need to make it easier for these companies to access capital. Some of the ideas that are going to be proposed in the legislation will do that. Some of the reforms to Reg A, Reg D, trying to look at raising the number of investors that a startup company can have before they have to report, all are, I think, sensible, appropriate incentives to help these startup companies get going. We also need, and I understand the very important requirements put in place by the so-called Sarbanes-Oxley legislation of a few years back, but the cost of going public for startup companies now, on average, $3 to $4 million. Those costs are not costs that many of these startup companies can absorb. So some of the sensible reforms that have been proposed by Senator Toomey, Senator Schumer, that I've been a proud co-sponsor on a so-called on-ramp for startup companies, I think makes sense as well. There's also other tools that we can use to help startup companies as they try to access capital. We've seen a dramatic transformation of the Internet over the last 20 years. Every business, every part of our life has been changed. There are now the ability to use the Internet as a way for small investors to get the same kind of deals that up to this point only select investors have gotten that have been customers of some of the best-known investment banking firms. Well, we can now use the power of the Internet to a term called crowdfunding. Now, there has to be appropriate investor restraints in this and investor protections, but crowdfunding using the Internet is another source of capital. I hope that would be included in the legislation that we're looking at, and I want to commend Senator Bennett and Senator Merkley and Senator Brown for working hard on that. But there are other pieces of this legislation. If we are going to compete and win in this global competition for talent and ideas and have these jobs created in America, that we've got to take on. That's why I was so proud to work with Senator Moran in our startup legislation that says attracting capital is one part of making a company successful. Another part of making a company successful is winning the worldwide competition for talent. And unfortunately, time and again, what we are doing in this country is we are losing that competition for the best talent. There are literally tens of thousands of jobs that are going unfilled right now because we do not have enough American-born scientists, engineers, mathematicians with graduate degrees. We in our country, because we have the world's best system of higher education, we train many of the world's best and brightest. But with our current immigration policies, we actually train those folks at the Virginia Techs and the University of New Mexico's, get them that PhD in engineering, and then we send them home when they have an opportunity to actually get a job here in this country. You can't talk to a tech company anywhere in America that says we are losing the competition for talent. So what does our legislation do? We actually do what tech firms have called for years, which is in effect staple that green card to those individuals who get not a bachelor's degree but a master's or PhD in the science, technology, engineering, or math field, the so-called STEM fields, if they have a job opportunity in America. Allow that intellectual capital and talent to actually reside and help create jobs here in this country. What we do as well is we create a new category, visa for, in effect, an entrepreneur's visa. We have a very narrow category within our immigration policies right now that allows certain immigrants who want to come, invest in our companies in this country, and hire Americans to get access to a visa. We would expand that category so that if an individual can demonstrate they've raised capital or are willing to hire a number of Americans, why don't we allow them to start that job here in America rather than going somewhere else to do it? So we've put in place, I believe, reasonable small changes to our immigration policies that will, again, allow us to compete. What our startup legislation does as well is it looks at how we can encourage our universities, because we need capital, we need talent, but we also need the intellectual capital, and that comes from ideas. And our universities across this country do a good job of doing basic research. Our universities across this country don't do as good a job as they could and should in moving those ideas from the laboratory into the marketplace. And I know my time is about to expire, so I'll wrap this up. What we do in our legislation as well is we don't add additional funding, but we take a small sliver, 0.15% of our existing research and development dollars, and actually use those as incentive funds to get ideas out of the laboratory into commercialization. So I know that we are going to move to this legislation shortly. I do believe that there were a number of members, particularly newer members, who've been working on this legislation across the aisle. There was an attempt to put together a broad bipartisan bill. I'm not sure that's going to come to pass on the floor, unfortunately, because on this issue I do agree with the Republican leader. There should not be a Republican or Democratic legislation. There should be a bipartisan piece of legislation here that will actually encourage startups to get the capital, to get the talent, to get the ideas, so that we can actually make sure that we move forward on job creation. The data is clear. The jobs over the last 20 years have come from these kind of startup companies, the kind that I was proud to help fund in my 20 years of identifying, funding, and working on these startup ventures. We need to do all we can to support them. We need to move this legislation as quickly as possible. And my hope is that we can move beyond the rather narrowly drawn capital formation legislation that we're going to look at, and look at these other areas around crowdfunding, around appropriate visa policies, around commercialization of intellectual capital to move these ideas forward. With that, I'm going to yield the floor to my friend and colleague, someone who has been a leader on this issue as well, somebody who I know has been crisscrossing the country over the last couple of days. Recently came back from Austin, Texas, where he was celebrated as a startup guru, and that is my friend, the senator from Kansas. And let me also acknowledge the senator from South Dakota, who has been a leader, particularly on the Reg D reform. So with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from South Dakota is recognized.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to enter into a colloquy with my colleague from Kansas, Senator Moran.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I do appreciate the opportunity to join with my colleague, Senator Moran from Kansas, to speak in support of the bill that is before us, H.R. 3606, the Jumpstart Our Business Startups, or JOBS Act. The JOBS Act is a bipartisan bill. It passed the House of Representatives by a vote of 390 to 23. It's also been endorsed by the White House. Small businesses are the engines of our economy, but government red tape is currently preventing these businesses from creating even more jobs. This common sense bill would enable small businesses in South Dakota and across the country to better access much-needed capital so that they can make investments and add additional employees. There's no reason why it should not receive similar support here in the United States Senate. Creating jobs, Mr. President, should be one of our top priorities here in the United States Senate. We owe it to the American people and to small businesses across this country that are counting on us to do something that will make it easier, less expensive, and less difficult to create jobs. Too often, Mr. President, what we see coming out of Washington, D.C. are policies that put up obstacles and barriers and impediments to our small businesses, making it more difficult and more costly to create jobs. We see that daily with regulations coming out of many of the agencies here in Washington, D.C. The senator from Kansas and I have been on the floor previously talking about regulations proposed by the Department of Labor, 85 pages worth of regulations that would, in a very prescriptive way, tell farmers and ranchers how young people can work in their farming and ranching operations. It is amazing to me the level of detail to which those regulations go and how prescriptive they are with regard to something that has historically in this country and traditionally been very much a part of our heritage, and that is the young people going up on farms, being involved in those farming and ranching operations, making them profitable, and we've got a federal agency now that thinks they know better. And so these 85 pages of regulations come out and suggest that there are certain things that young people on farms and ranches should not do. Not only suggest them, say they can't do. Can't herd cattle from the back of a horse, can't work around grain bins and stockyards, can't work with animals that are more than 6 months old, can't work at elevations or heights more than 6 feet. These are all things that the Department of Labor in their infinite wisdom has determined that they know better about farming and ranching operations in this country than do the people who work there. And it really would transform the way in which family farm and ranch operations are conducted in this country. And it does put additional costs and barriers up to these farmers and ranchers who work so hard to make a living. They really are the quintessential small businesses in our country. They work hard, they've got a tremendous work ethic, they are people who make their living on the land, and all they simply ask from their government is that they not impose these types of barriers and regulations and impediments to them doing what they do best, and that is to feed the world and to create a strong and vibrant farm economy here in this country. And so the jobs bill that is before us today, Mr. President, takes us in a different direction than all the regulations I just referred to, which make it more difficult and more expensive for people in this country to create jobs and to grow their businesses. This package of bills that came over from the House of Representatives, which, as I mentioned, passed by a vote of 390 to 23. There were only 23 dissenting votes in the House. It was an overwhelming bipartisan majority in support of this legislation. And it's because these are such commonsensical things, so commonsensical that the White House has endorsed most of these bills, if not all of these bills, and they passed in the House of Representatives individually before they were packaged into this particular piece of legislation that was sent to us here by that 390 to 23 vote. They were passed individually by huge votes. There's a piece of legislation, a bill that was passed in the House of Representatives that Senator Toomey has the companion bill here in the Senate to, that passed 421 to 1. We had one of these bills that passed in the House of Representatives by voice vote. And the legislation, the bill that I have that's a part of this package, passed in the House of Representatives by a vote of 413 to 11 last November. That also was included in this jobs bill that has come over to us now from the House. So what we want to do is make it easier for the small businesses, which literally are the engine and the backbone of our economy, create most of the new jobs in our economy, to do that, to create jobs, to invest capital, to put their capital to work, and to make our economy grow. And so I would just say by way of introduction, Mr. President, that I hope that we can not only get to this bill, get on this bill, but move quickly to pass it through the Senate and get it on the President's desk, because we don't have a lot of time to waste. We all know what the statistics are in this country. We know the high unemployment rate, the chronic high unemployment rate that we have seen, the sluggish economic growth. We need to get this economy growing again. We need to make it easier, not harder, for small businesses to create jobs and to get access to capital. And many of these bills in this package the small business jobs package really do focus on the issue of capital formation and allowing small businesses in this country to have easier access to the capital that will allow them to grow their companies and to grow jobs. So, Mr. President, what I'd like to do is, my colleague from Kansas is here. As I said, is someone who, as a member of the Senate Banking Committee, has been a leader on this legislation, on many of these issues, and a leader, as I mentioned earlier, in fighting regulations coming out of Washington, D.C., that make it harder and more difficult and more expensive to create jobs. And in particular, as I mentioned earlier, we had this discussion a couple of weeks ago with regard to these Department of Labor regulations impacting family farms and ranches, just one of many regulations, the proliferation of regulations coming out of Washington, D.C. that consistently are overreaching in terms of their impact and what they do to create additional burdens for our small businesses. So I'd like to yield to my colleague from Kansas for his observations and thoughts with regard to the jobs bill that's before us and what we as the Senate ought to be doing to try and create better conditions and a more favorable environment for our small businesses to create jobs.
Mr. President, I thank the Senator from South Dakota and pleased that we're here finally on a topic of significant importance to the country. We've heard for a long time about the necessity of creating jobs, of creating an opportunity for Americans to succeed. In fact, I would guess that's the primary motivation for why many of us serve in the United States Senate, is so that every generation, those who follow us, but those even today, have the opportunity to pursue the American dream. I think our goal here is not to create a circumstance in which no one fails, but the goal here is to create a circumstance in which many succeed. And so while it's been very disappointing that the Senate has failed for so long to get to the important topic that we should be addressing, job creation, we are finally here today, and I commend the leaders of both parties for reaching an agreement that allows us to begin the discussion and ultimately, hopefully we pass the jobs bill in a form just like the House passed just a few days ago. I came to this issue of job creation and innovation and entrepreneurship with the realization that this Congress is failing, this administration is failing to address the issue of the deficit and the financial condition of our country. I believe that my kids and those Americans who follow us are going to be in much worse shape because the administration and Congress have failed to address the issue that we face today, which was our country is broke. We're spending money we don't have, and we can't seem to resolve that issue in a way that puts us on a path toward a balanced budget. And I won't ever walk away from my belief that that's necessary, and that I will continue to work as a member of the Senate Appropriations Committee in every capacity I have here to see that we get our spending under control and that we're on that path toward balancing the budget. But because of the administration and the leadership of this Congress to address, the Senate to address this issue of the deficit, I started looking for ways in which we could approach the deficit in perhaps a way that is easier for us to grasp, easier for us to deal with, and that is job creation. Because the more people that are working, the more taxes that are collected, and the more money comes to the coffers of the United States Treasury to pay down this tremendous debt. And these two issues are actually related. I've tried to figure out how I explain this to Kansans back home about why the deficit matters in whether or not they have a job or have a good job or can pursue a better job. And the answer is that no business is going to expand, no business is going to grow, no business is going to invest in capital and plant equipment and hire new people if they're concerned that the United States may be the next Greece. We may be the next country in which our creditors decide that we're no longer capable of paying back this tremendous debt that has accrued now over a long period of time and escalated in just the last few years. So the goal of paying down the debt is certainly worthy in and of itself, but if we can do that, we also have the opportunity to create an environment in which business does feel comfortable in hiring more employees and adding to plant and equipment and investing in their business and growing it. And so today we come to the Senate floor in support of the jobs bill as passed by the House of Representatives in hopes that the Senate will do so in short order. and it is the opportunity we have to make a tremendous difference so that Americans can today and in the future pursue that American dream. We, over a long period of time, have created many impediments toward the success of that job creation. The Senator from South Dakota talks about the regulatory environment, and we have highlighted here on the Senate floor a major overreach that fundamentally alters the way we live our lives back home in Kansas in regard to family farms. Farming and ranching in our state is a family operation, and yet the Department of Labor believes it's their role to tell parents what that relationship should be with their own children and their ability to work on their own family farm. It is just an example of this mindset in our nation's capital that exists today that says we know better than the American people. We know better than mom and dad. We know better than the family about what is the role for a young person working on a family farming operation back home in Kansas and across the country. But it's just an example. Those regulations are there today. They're being proposed all the time. And in my view, if the federal government believes that it has this significant role to play in defining the relationship between mom and dad and working on a farm, what really can't the federal government tell us back home what we can and can't do? If they can go so far as to define the opportunity that a young, and I guess I should say, who more than a parent cares more about the safety of their own children that they're working side by side or working with a neighboring farmer or rancher? Who more cares than that parent? And so this is but one example in which we have decided that the government knows best. The Department of Labor knows better than mom and dad. And my point is that once we reach that kind of conclusion, then there is really nothing off limits for the federal government to say we know better than the citizens of our country. And that is a misguided approach to the federal government, to the role that we are to play. But it is a handicap and hindrance toward the ability of the American people, entrepreneurs, innovators, those across the country who believe in the free enterprise system and believe in pursuing the American dream for themselves and, more importantly, for their families. It's an impediment to them ever pursuing that opportunity to create a job and to create an economy that encourages job creation. I appreciate earlier Senator Warner, the senator from Virginia, being on the Senate floor and talking about legislation that he and I are working on called the Startup Act. And we continue to believe that there is a great opportunity for entrepreneurs. In fact, research shows, this is from the Kauffman Foundation, that startups less than 5 years old accounted for nearly all of the net jobs created in the United States from 1980 to 2005. In fact, startups create 3 million new jobs every year. And so what we're about today is a portion of this legislation that Senator Warner and I have introduced, the Startup Act. We're about the capital formation provisions of that bill. We've been working with Senator Coons and Senator Rubio and others to blend these provisions into the Startup Act, but a portion is now on the Senate floor, and I'm certainly one here to commend the opportunity that we have today to pursue that portion of job creation. It's not enough, but it's certainly a great beginning point for us in the United States Senate to follow the lead of the United States House of Representatives and create this opportunity for capital formation. What this legislation does is create tax incentives that will spur investments in startups, reduce the regulatory burden and barriers that make it harder for startups to grow, and win the battle for us to see that the United States remains a highly competitive, innovative, entrepreneurial environment in which businesses succeed. And I suppose, and when we say about businesses succeeding, it's not about necessarily the business's success, it's about what the consequences are when business succeeds, and that means that Americans have jobs and the opportunity to put food on their family's table and save for their kids' education and save for their retirement and meet the needs of our responsibilities we have as parents and as members of a family. So I join the senator from South Dakota in my strong support for moving forward and passage of this jobs legislation, but I also would ask the Senate to consider further legislative initiatives such as the one that Senator Warner and I have to make certain that we do more to create that circumstance, that opportunity in America where everyone has the opportunity to succeed and that many will.
Would the senator from Kansas yield for a question on the subject of jobs and the economy And I appreciate his legislation. I hope that that, too, is acted on.